Sample. I'm the Key Services Grants Manager. I work with our team that oversees the HOPWA, ESG, COC, and TANF funding. And we have our third session today about the COC program competition and what this looks like for you as a renewal project. Let's just dive right in and talk about what we're going to talk about today. So today we're going to do a quick check-in on policies, since that's what we went over primarily last week. We will review renewal application questions and have a discussion of the anticipated timeline for what's coming next. I'll also be discussing some additional support opportunities throughout the presentation, so please keep an ear open for any opportunities you have to participate in either other sessions or reach out to us for support or technical assistance, whether it is my team, the grants team, and the analyst teams, Joe Rita and Alicia, or our fantastic HMIS team who are on the call today with us to answer any questions that may arise as well. So appreciate everybody's time today, and we are going to dive right into just a quick follow-up about policies related to the competition. As a reminder from last week, the policies, sorry, need to hop into one thing first. Just want to clarify again some terminology, that there are agencies who operate projects and grants together, as in they have one grant with a single project inside of it. And then, especially for those of you who are IHTDA subrecipients, we have several grants that have multiple projects within them. When it comes to the actual operation of the renewal application, you are applying as an individual project. But when we move into the ranking process and moving into the actual submission to HUD, the grant is what goes to HUD. So I wanted to hit on that really quickly because we will be talking more about the competition today and what the process is for what you are sent and what you are provided. And I just want to make sure we're being clear on that one more time before we hop into some of that stuff. So for those of you, for example, who are operating DV bonus rapid rehousing, you are projects under a multiple projects under a grant. And for those of you like, Family Services Howard County, they have their rapid rehousing grant with HUD and a Jackson Street Common Supportive Housing Project and grant with us. So it's a single grant, single project with us, as opposed to multi-project grant with us. Okay, so again, very brief on policies. I just want to hit on a couple of things here. So last week we talked about primarily these 4 policies, and today I wanted to hit on just a reminder about a couple of things as it relates to ranking reallocation and scoring and ranking. So as a reminder that if you are a new project, if you've operated for less than 1 year, you will not have a competitively ranked project. So our partners who just received funding through the fiscal year 2023 NOFO at Family Services Hendricks County, or Family Promise Hendricks County, and the expansion, well, it won't really apply under Brightpoint because it was an expansion, but we will only be looking at the grants that have been operating longer than a year. In the case of an expansion, you're not really being evaluated separately on the expanded portion of the grants, so there's no change in the evaluation process. You'd still be ranked accordingly, though we may have some additional considerations for things like spend down and stuff as we go through the review process that we might consider so that we don't have any misalignment with that. So for example, Beacon Inc. down in Bloomington received a grant in fiscal year 2022 funding. They are now in the process of completing, I believe, their full year of operations, but we will be talking to them about whether or not they would be competitively ranked or not. Last year they were, I think, just getting started up as the NOFA was getting kicked off. So we need to speak with Forrest and his team to see if they've had a full year of operations for us to include them in the ranking competitively. We try and rank everybody in a closest alignment with their application score as possible. And again, to clarify, if you have a project that's part of a larger grant, you are ranked together with the highest ranking project. So if you have 5 projects in a single grant and one of them scores all the points, all of the grants, all of the projects are ranked with that one grant. that can be helpful for some folks who are maybe having more challenges, but it's just an easier way to rank everybody in a quicker way than trying to do another approach. Our reallocation policy is driven by the Funding and Resources Committee. That policy is applied based upon the percent of expenditures. Projects are only reallocated primarily for expenditures. And if somebody has a performance-driven reallocation, we would have been talking to you for months. So nobody has ever reallocated or has funding taken away because of poor outcomes in HMIS. Poor data quality. It's all driven by funding and resources at this time with expenditures. So if you score poorly on the renewal application, the consequence is that you are ranked lower on the ranking to HUD. It is not that we reallocate funding from your project or remove. If you were to be so poor performing that we would decide to remove your project in some way or take money from it, that would be part of a much longer conversation. We probably would have been working with you for over a year to try and support you. So definitely don't confuse those two issues. Ranking is a score-based decision. Reallocation is an expenditure-based decision. So I wanted to share some additional information about the scoring policy. Our application tool is typically around 100 points and some bonus points available. And we're going to talk more about what those points come from in this session today. In 2024, this upcoming competition, we're likely going to move that percentage of total points from 65 to 70, just because we are finding that some of our projects that score particularly low probably could have used some additional help or support prior to getting a score of 70%. So additionally, I think HUD likes to see us progress in our scoring evaluation to make sure we are really providing a lot of support to projects if they are scoring low on our performance criteria. So just be aware of that. It's not going to impact anybody right now. But we are going to talk more about low scoring projects later, and I wanted to just kind of put that on your radar. This policy about the 70% hasn't been approved yet, but it's currently kind of what's under consideration with the Funding and Resources Committee who sets those policies. And then I wanted to hit on one other thing because this question came up last week about project selection. This is primarily for new project applications, but I want to hit on this in a broad base. So in the balance of state, I have not yet been a part of a ranking process here where we have not selected and ranked to HUD all of the projects that would like to receive funding, including new projects. We have had projects voluntarily remove themselves from the consideration process. They've decided to no longer continue and decide not to be included in the IRPA, in the application process. And in that case, their funding was all reallocated and given to new projects. And that was the decision of the agency. Now, what I will say is that there is a process that HUD then selects projects. And we talked a little bit about that before, but I want everyone to be aware that projects that are submitted to HUD, it is still HUD's discretion to select them. And they do that based upon the funding that's available and how well all of the other continuum of cares across the country are performing and how well all of the projects within those continuums of care align with HUD priorities. We in our portfolio typically have not had any issue getting all of our renewal projects funded, but it's always a risk that if you are lower ranked in the ranking, that your grant or your project/grant could not be selected for funding. That's always a risk that happens in the competition. It is a competitive process. So we can never guarantee anybody funding, though we do have a relatively safe bet that any of our projects that are scoring high enough to be in the top 90 to 95% of the funding that we have available are likely to receive funding. I'm happy to dive into that more one-on-one if people want to know the ins and outs of that process, but I don't want to get too in depth today because it's not necessarily the best use of time. It's more technical than I think most people need to know. The big takeaway is if you are scoring low and you are ranking low on the ranking, you are at more risk of not being selected for funding. Now, because of the way our board has traditionally decided to rank projects, new projects are typically ranked below renewal projects regardless of their score. So if a renewal project scored 70 and a new project scored 71, we'd still likely see that renewal project ranked ahead of the new project. That's just because we want to protect those renewal projects, especially as a balance of state. We do not necessarily want to risk a renewal project unnecessarily. Like I said, in the past, the board, and I believe they continue to have this philosophy, believes that unless we have some major issues, we don't want to risk existing projects because we have clients counting on those projects, in many cases, very underserved parts of our state, and we don't want to risk that. Now, in the case of domestic violence bonus, and I want to clarify this because it is confusing, is the fact that we have, and I think we'll continue to call our renewal projects that were originally funded under the domestic violence bonus program in 2018 or 2017. I can't remember what year this money came through. We typically still call them DV bonus. We call them our DV bonus rapid rehousing projects, our DV bonus transitional housing to rapid rehousing projects. In all intents and purposes, they're renewal projects. They were funded through those DV bonus dollars. They're dedicated to survivors of domestic violence, but they aren't bonus funding any longer. It's all part of our renewal. Now, in the case of those projects, they're just ranked as renewal grants. They're a part of the portfolio. They have a number of projects within them, and whoever scores the highest, that is the ranking for the entire grant, and they're part of the ranking process. In the case of new domestic violence bonus, because this question was brought up last week, there was a question about how are DV bonus projects selected, and I provided a little bit of context, but I'll just provide more here now. In that, when we have new domestic violence bonus, the board has traditionally decided to rank the domestic violence bonus at the very bottom of the ranking. So if we had 80 projects, renewal and new projects, and one domestic violence bonus, that domestic violence bonus, that new domestic violence bonus project would be ranked at 81st. And that's because the way that HUD has funded domestic violence bonus is it's a distinct pot of money, separate from the rest of the funding that's available. And the board has said, we'd like to try and fund this through DV bonus. That's what we want it for. And by placing it at the bottom of the ranking, it does not change anything about the project. It doesn't make it less likely to be funded by putting it at the bottom. What it does do is it makes it eligible for DV bonus, for selection for DV bonus. It allows it to be selected, but it doesn't risk any of the new projects that we're trying to get in that don't serve DV survivors that we're not trying to use DV bonus project funding for. If we put it higher than the very bottom, we potentially would get a DV bonus project paid for out of non-DV bonus funds, and then we wouldn't get a new project that isn't eligible for DV bonus. So that is why you'll often see the DV bonus at the bottom of the ranking. It's always the board's choice to decide to change that policy and include it elsewhere, but it's typically the strategy because it's more advantageous for all of our new projects and doesn't risk the DV bonus for us to just include it at the bottom of the ranking. How it gets then selected by HUD is based upon the quality of the application itself, of the project and the grant application, and the quality of our narrative responses to domestic violence related questions in the full continuum of care application. And last year we missed selection by about 4 points. So we were really close. We weren't quite there, and we'll definitely look and evaluate about applying again. So I just want to clarify that since that was a question that came up last time, and I said we would get a little bit more into it this time. But I want to clarify that, especially since we're going to be talking about the renewal application today, and you may not be familiar with how projects are selected. So let's dive into the renewal application. And before I do that, I'm just going to check and see if I have any questions. And hopefully you're not having to see that. Okay, no questions so far, but still absolutely happy to answer any that come up. So what are our renewal application questions? Fun surprise, they're almost identical to last year. So there's a link here in the presentation if you want to go look at last year's questions. We still have everything from last year up because we don't take it down. Because why? I mean, it's not hurting anything to be there. You may want to look at it. And I know HUD looks at it after our competition closes, so we just might as well leave it up. Okay, so the first questions in here, and just to kind of note, is that throughout the application tool and the instructions themselves, which are something that are provided every year, we provide a detailed set of instructions to go alongside the application. There are dates listed for when you are responding to each question. So in the case of certain questions, we're providing a date that is kind of very recent. And in the case of other questions, we are listing a calendar year from the previous year. I realize that may be confusing. I think it's all about because different questions measure different things. So timeliness is just a different factor there. And that's how the Funding and Resources Committee, the board has traditionally decided to date these questions. The threshold questions that are listed in the application are the same thing you've seen in the past. The time frame that we'd be examining in the case of threshold questions would be from last July to this June. So it will kind of overlap into the time of period of the renewal. And that is whether or not your agency is participating in your local regional planning council. Did you have any development day attendance, which includes the housing conference in the fall and the development day in the spring? So either what we did last fall or what we're about to have hosted at the end of this month, obviously. And then did you participate in other training sessions like the HMIS coffee, any of our COC trainings? Did you attend these meetings? And they're very, base questions about your engagement with the process and just kind of basic expectation for, again, threshold of engagement with the process. In the case of the funding questions and specific project details, there's going to be a question there about whether or not you received all of your referrals for your project from coordinated entry from 12/1/1/23 to 12/31/23. So again, calendar year question. They're going to ask you about whether or not you drew regularly on your fiscal year 2021 grant, which again, this is what's always weird, right? We're always so behind in COC, but we have selected that fiscal year 2021 because that is the most recently closed out grant. So some of you are still operating your 2022 funding, so we can't ask about 22. We have to ask about 21. So at some point in 23, you were operating a fiscal year 2021 grant. And we just want to know, did you claim regularly on that, either with HUD or with IHCDA? And there's different parameters depending on whether or not the grant was direct HUD funded or through IHCDA. It's going to ask you about whether or not you submitted your pre-contracting documents, your grant agreement, your closeout. Did you do all of these things on time? We do ask for your response on that, and then we do go back and verify, do some spot checking on some things. We will ask HUD if we have a concern about something, and that will help guide us on whether or not we decide to, determine that those points were allowable on the application. Housing First, similar to last year, we're going to ask you to provide a copy of your Housing First policies, and then we're going to ask you a series of questions that we've been using for at least 2 or 3 competitions about your Housing First practices and your principles in practice. So again, we'll give you a link to what last year's tool was, but it's going to ask you, are you terminating clients without cause? Are you terminating people for substance use? Or are you requiring income before they enter? Very, very straightforward checklist, yes, no kind of questions on the Housing First criteria. The next questions are related to performance, and this is typically where people get tripped up for any number of reasons. So I'll spend a little bit more time on these performance questions. The first one here is about HMIS, and all of the performance questions are going to be based on a calendar year 2023. So again, 1/1/23 to 12/31/23, starting with our homeless management information system questions. And these are about data quality. And I can tell you, we had a lot of people miss points on these questions. So there's going to be percent thresholds that align with the data quality plan that the HMIS team has approved by the board of the COC board that ask you about, what percentage of people are missing key PII? What percentage of people are missing their UDEs? What percentage of people are missing income data? And how timely are you in your data collection? I will say we have changed, we're likely changing this particular question to be that they've entered records within 7 business days because that's what the data quality plan says. And I think the number last year was just a little bit off of that time frame. So the percentages here have been pretty consistent over the last few years, and they've been reviewed most recently by the HMIS team last year. And we felt pretty good about where we were setting those, again, because they were in alignment with the data quality plan. And we really hope that we see some improved outcomes here. these questions are all based upon small percentages, with the exception of the income question. I think that has a higher percentage where that may be missing for people. Now, I know what someone might say. Well, my particular population I serve, they have a lot of fear or anxiety about entering data into this data system. So that's why my data quality is poor. We understand that. We still have to ask the question. So there will be questions throughout this entire performance section that may feel advantageous or disadvantageous to certain types of projects or certain key populations. And that's just the way the evaluation tool works. There are some questions in particular for certain types of projects later that maybe give you a little bit of a boost if you score poorly in this section, on maybe HMIS or another question, but it is just the nature of how these applications work. We are evaluated by HUD on all of these things, so we need to evaluate the funded partners in the same way. The next question is based upon the annual performance report, again, from 1/1/23 to 12/31/23. This is going to be about maintain housing or exit to permanent housing. So in the case of a supportive housing project, did people stay in your program, or if they did leave, did they exit to a permanent housing destination? And then in the case of a rapid rehousing or transitional project, did they move on to a permanent destination, or did they move on to a non-permanent destination? So temporary destinations are not counted here. It's only the permanent ones. It's important to understand that. And then if you have stayers, they are counted. So if everyone in your project stayed, then you will have 100% essentially on here. You won't have any exits to a non-permanent destination if you had no exits. So that's the important thing to know here. Now, the next one here may sound like it's kind of going back to the same question we had before, but it is in fact not. This one is about exits to homelessness. So this does include folks who exit to an unknown destination, but we are talking about only people in the APR. And again, the question numbers are listed here. So if you go actually and look at the tool itself, you'll see the question numbers. We'll talk more later, but you can find all of these questions in your annual performance report. You look here and you're only looking for emergency shelter, transitional housing, unsheltered homelessness, client refused, and data not collected. So this is information that is collected at a household level, and it is about where did the household go. And at that point, again, it may feel like it's kind of the opposite of the other one, but you're really not getting dinged here because this isn't measuring every type of exit. It's only exits to homelessness or unknown. So if somebody goes to temporary, they're not included in this. If somebody goes to treatment, they're not included in this. If somebody dies, they're not included in this. Now, if somebody dies and when your case manager went to put in the exit outcome and they say client refused instead of client died, then yes, you would have somebody counted there. But that's obviously a data quality issue. It's not necessarily that somebody's getting dinged for having a death. All right. Performance question about maintain or increase income. Again, this one is a tough one. It is, this is one that we have seen some fluctuation in scores with. So we are currently evaluating what percentage we'd like to set this one at for full points. But it is really important. HUD always looks at whether or not we're evaluating ourselves and what we're doing as a continuum of care statewide to help support people in increasing income. So we'll always have this one on here. But this is only for adults over 18 who have maintained or increased income. And this is not just like earned income. This includes all income types. So if you are a project that has had trouble remembering to have folks do an annual assessment at the proper time, this is the one that typically will get you, because that annual assessment question is when you're asked about changes to income. And if somebody didn't exit, then you're not going to have other income information about them. So again, when we get later on in the discussion today about how to prepare for the renewal application, this is a great question to look at in your APR CAPER review tool and in your annual assessment, the new annual assessment tool that the HMIS team has launched to help you make sure you can improve this, this calculation for you. The last performance question is about the last few, sorry, there's a couple more here, is about utilization on the PIT count dates, which are the last Wednesday of the quarter, or the first Wednesday of the quarter. Yes, the first Wednesday of the quarter. I almost caught it. Anyway, it's in the first month of the quarter. I think it's the last Wednesday of the first month. I think I'm getting myself tangled up here in words, but if anybody on our HMIC wants to throw it in the chat exactly what day it's pulled. This one I know is hard. We've been strategically reducing points on this one over time. This is something you are evaluated on in your closeout. So that's one reason why it's typically in here. And HUD usually wants an explanation from organizations when you do your closeout in SAGE and you've got, really bad percentages here. They're going to know why. And similarly, we evaluate you on this one. But again, we've been reducing points on this question over time. I would anticipate, with board support and with, the go ahead from our experts on the COC program, we may decide to eliminate this question altogether over time because we know it's not the best measure, but it's the only measure we have right now for how well projects are remaining full, essentially. Are you filling all of the units you're supposed to in your program? Resource utilization, there we are, there's my last question. So then we also have resource utilization, meaning spending. So what did you spend in your fiscal year grant? That is the grant that was your most recently closed out grant. I don't think anyone has closed out 2022 yet. I think some people might be about to close out 2022, but we are talking about fiscal year 2021 in this case. If you are an IHCDA subrecipient, we will always put in there what the grant agreement number will include in it. In the middle dash in there, it'll say 022. That was your 2021 funding. It just was dated 2022 because that's the time frame we implemented the grant. So if you ever have a question and it's a subrecipient grant of IHCDA about what year we're talking about for funding utilization, always look for that 022 in there and you'll be able to evaluate appropriately. Now we have a couple of questions related to equity and representation that are actually from the APR, but we don't consider them performance questions. So for some of our folks who say, hey, we've got like really hard to serve clients, we're serving domestic violence survivors, that's why maybe our outcomes are really poor in income, or we have a lot of difficulty getting people to maintain or exit to permanent housing or whatever. There are some points here for projects that are serving kind of these key population types. HUD has kind of made it a priority for us to encourage projects to not only take referrals off of coordinated entry, but to continue to serve people with high barriers and serve folks with domestic violence history. So we will have these questions in here again. We are looking at adjusting the percentages on some of on the severe service need question to lower that threshold for our supportive housing projects. I think, again, 3+ conditions when it's self-reported. Sometimes people don't report all their conditions, and so we understand that. And so we're kind of looking at the data right now to adjust that. The questions themselves, like I said, are pretty set in stone. We haven't had, broad-based support from our Funding and Resources Committee to make a lot of whole heart changes. But these are just some of the changes that I'm anticipating based upon some recent conversations and what we're proposing with that group right now. All right. Then there is our questions about what is the agency doing to increase equity and representation and educate their board and their staff about these issues. And these are just some yes/no questions related to training and related to organizational outcomes tracking. Are you tracking outcomes within your agency on based on demographics to kind of help your organization have a better understanding about whether or not you have disparity in your outcomes? If people who of color are having poor outcomes than people who are white, does that something that your agency is exploring, for example? This is just a yes/no question, so it's not asking you for a lot of detail on that. It's just asking whether or not you have tracked that or are collecting that. Lived experience. This is, of course, a requirement for the COC program that you have somebody on your board with lived experience. So we give you kind of a point there for doing what you're required to do, though we do know sometimes there are gaps for folks. And then some additional questions about whether or not there's agency leaders with lived experience or whether or not there's a recent experience. And this, again, this recent experience is driven by HUD. They have been evaluating COCs on whether or not the representation within their boards and committees of folks with lived experience is also recent. So we've kind of passed that question on to you all as projects. Then we have our equity questions for bonus questions, and apparently I have a typo here, so let me fix that. It's going to drive me nuts looking at it. So these are extra points. So these are not required points, but for some of our organizations, especially those of you who had maybe some performance issues, some of you all had a lot of help from these bonus questions. Our bonus points are between 10 and 25 points. I can't remember exactly. I think everybody got some bonus points last year, but I think the most anybody got was about 15 to 20. So I know in past years we've had upwards of 25, and I'd anticipate us sticking right around 20 for bonus points. So these questions here are going to be pretty consistent. We continue to kind of scan other COCs to see how they're evaluating this issue, and we're not really seeing a whole lot of movement on what questions people are asking. So we're kind of sticking with these until we find better ones. And these are bonus questions. So they are not core points. They're not core to your response. These are extra points that can help you maybe make up for some missed points that you had during your application. A lot of these are best practices within the social service sector, within homeless services. And one reason why we are encouraging us to continue to ask questions about equity issues is that HUD continues to prioritize lived experience, how are COCs addressing equity. And as long as HUD is prioritizing that, if we reflect that back in our evaluation of projects, HUD says, oh, look at the COCs in alignment with HUD. They're doing things we want them to do. It helps us in our full application to HUD, which in turn helps how many projects we have selected for the NOFO. So a couple application tips and advice. And before I do that, I'm just going to hop in here and see if I have any questions. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I think there is.
Yeah, I see one from Jill. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Hey, Jill, absolutely. We will provide one-on-one guidance for projects that need to consolidate. That did consolidate in 2023. Very good question. So one of the things to know about consolidation is that there are some HMIS implications. So Jill, really for us on our side, HMIS is going to be the big thing for you. And then the rest of it you can do with your HUD since you're direct HUD funded. So what I would do is send a help desk ticket for your projects when you're maybe about 45 days out from starting. I'll defer to our HMIS team members who are in attendance if you guys want it any earlier than that. But they won't really merge your projects until your new contract's going to start. And then what we will be aware of as you're going into, this next year is that you're not this year, but your next year data is going to look a little bit wonky. So if our HMIS team has any feedback on when you like to know about a consolidation, feel free to either shout it out or put it in the chat. But I definitely don't think you need to, reach out now if you're not contracting until September, because that will obviously, things will just get lost in the shuffle. But there is certainly an opportunity for us to support you through that HMIS transition to make sure all the clients get merged together into the surviving project and all of that. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So good question for your IRPA this year. If you consolidated in this last year, whatever you have, if you have a single APR now because you've consolidated, that's what you'll use. In the case, Jill, of your project that just went through in consolidation, you'll have your two separate APRs still. And then what we'll do is we'll just rank it with the highest scoring one. So whichever one scored higher, we'll rank them together when we submit back to HUD. Okay, thanks, Daniela. Okay, let them know as soon as possible. That's why I have you on here, so you can keep me as my accountability partner. So yeah, HMI's team says they'd like to know as soon as possible if you had an approved consolidation. We will definitely talk more when we get to the competition about how to consolidate if you want to do that. And that's not a problem at all. It's very simple. Okay, exciting. Well, exciting for you all, Jill. I know you've been wanting to do that for a while, so I'm really excited that on 7/1 you'll have your consolidated project. That's fantastic. All right, so we'll move forward with some application tips and advice. I'm not here to teach to the test, I guess, but I do want to provide some feedback based upon my experience with my past COC and since I've been here for 2 competitions about what typically we're seeing in applications and how to prepare. So how to prepare. The number one thing that if I could ask you to do anything is please run your APR and use that APR CAPR review tool in HMIS. If you find problems, file a help desk ticket now. if you cannot resolve them yourself. So obviously, if you go in and you see the problem, you can fix it. No big deal. You don't have to let us know or anything like that. But if you get in there and you see an error and you don't know how to fix it, or maybe your report's not pulling for some reason, there's some sort of problem, reach out to the team via the help desk. Our team, the grants team, Jo Rita, Alicia, and I are happy to support you in whatever way we can. If you reach out to us with a problem with your APR, we will tell you to file a help desk ticket because we do not have the level of administrative access to provide any technical support or make any corrections or assist you in any way. So please make sure you use that help desk ticket. One of the most important reasons why you need to do this now and before we even launch the renewal application is because there are, between IHCDA projects and direct HUD projects, we've got, well over 70 different grants that are, or 70 different projects that are receiving grant funding. And if everybody waits until the IRPA is available and you find a problem, we're not going to have time to fix it. And especially if for some reason there's just a general HMIS problem. If we find it now, I don't anticipate that, but if we find it now, what a relief. We aren't getting into competition periods suddenly behind because we didn't realize there were issues. Again, I don't anticipate that, but crazy things have happened. So anything is possible. So please, anything, run that data and check it out. We'll talk more about how you can look at that data in just a moment. Use that APR CAPER review tool in HMIS. I provided that link last time, but I'm sure somebody from the HMIS team can share with you the information on the IHCDA website about where you can find the instructions for how to run these different reports. Go to your team that are familiar with HMIS. If people need training, there are plenty of upcoming training sessions available that you can see listed when you log into HMIS. There's calendars and all sorts of great information there for you. So take a look at that stuff if you need extra training on anything and use those resources that are available. The next thing that I would encourage you to do as you prepare for the renewal application is meet internally, because you're going to be asked some of these questions. I just provided you the list of actual questions. I'll provide this as a PDF to you. You can bring this for a discussion with your colleagues. Who in your agency is familiar with your organization's operations and policies, whether it is related to client policies or hiring policies or board recruitment policies? Getting any of those folks together to discuss what is happening in spaces like diversity, equity, and inclusion will help you be more prepared for a good response on some of those bonus questions. If you are not sure about the answer to some of the things like, did we submit all our reports on time? Maybe you're not the reports person. Did we submit our claims? I don't know. Have that discussion in advance so you are kind of mentally prepared to say, okay, I think we're gonna, have maybe some missed points here, or just to start, preparing. Because the other thing about this is by the time we finish this process, we're already halfway through the year and we're about to ask you all these questions again or something similar next year. So anything you can do to start having some internal conversations about maybe some missed opportunities or plans you'd like to make for the future is also a part of what can help you, moving forward. Another thing to know is that in the case of some of these questions we're going to ask you about, have you had training on XYZ topic? What are you doing to support clients, providing feedback, things like these bonus questions or some of our non-bonus questions? There's nothing to say that if you were to talk internally now, you couldn't plan something between now and when the IRPA is due that you could include in your application. You'll notice those dates there. They dip into end of June. So it's not like you'd be able to have the most successful activity ever, but you could have something there if it's really important to your organization. I'm not telling anyone to prioritize something that isn't a priority because we've got lots on our plates. But if it is, if you really want to see improvement in a certain area or your organization is prioritizing doing some of this training anyway, maybe scheduling it before your application is due would mean that you could score a little bit higher. I say this as somebody who fills out a very big application to HUD every year, and we intentionally schedule our training to always be completed before we have to submit because we know we're going to be scored and asked those questions. So it's a strategy. It's a way we address some of these things, and it's maybe a helpful tip to you and your organization if you are already kind of planning something or you'd like to encourage your organization to do something. Here's a little carrot because it might help you increase your points and score better on your application. Maybe that's a pride point for you or something you'd like to achieve this year. Make sure you're reviewing your expenditures on a regular basis. And in particular, look at the grant that closed in fiscal year 2021. So for those of you who contract directly with HUD, look at that closeout report that you submitted. What did you report as your expenditures? How close were you to that 75% threshold? Were you just above it? Were you just below it? I anticipate the board being interested in upping that threshold a little bit, just because we've seen a lot of reallocation recently, and we'd like to continue to advance our goals. But, just taking a look at that and identifying internally with your team whether or not under expenditure could be an issue for you as you go into this next competition application. And then finally, contact Jo Rita, Alicia, myself, contact all three of us, contact your analyst if you have any questions. So how to read an annual performance report, APR. My biggest request, and I think I said this last year, for those of you who are new, but maybe don't remember, or maybe don't remember, put your APR into a usable format before you try and enter data into your renewal application. We see a lot of fat fingers or fat thumbs, whatever you want to call it, where people mistype. We also see a lot of just like, where did somebody get this number? And we're going through the APR and we can't find where somebody said, oh, we had 100% of clients get income. Like, awesome, but that's not the percentage we see in the report. So if you're trying to use, I don't know if many of you are familiar, if you're trying to use that zip file and look at those individual CSV Excel files to find your number, it can get very overwhelming very quickly. Do yourself a favor and get it into a usable format. We typically suggest, for the purposes of the competition, to put it through the test site on Sage. You do not need a Sage account to use the test site, and you should be able to test your APR that way. You can also use the APR Caper review tool. I believe it will give you all the same numbers. I think I've seen outputs of that report, but the test report here is the one most commonly used by folks. They take this, they PDF it and submit it with their IRPA. I think this was implied, but you provide us with a copy of your APR when you submit your IRPA so that we can verify your responses. So, getting ready, and preparing, get it into a format you can look at, because otherwise it gets really hard for you to understand what you're supposed to be putting in, and it's easy to make mistakes. If you would like to look at last year's IRPA, last year's renewal application, it is available on the IHCDA website. Again, I will PDF this and get this out to everybody, but I'll also put it in the chat. It sits up there year round until we're done using it. It's there for you to take a look at. Again, we're nearly identical on the points. We've upped some and decreased others. We've changed some percentages just slightly, but in lots of cases, people are either going to get the points or they're not. There are some where you're kind of close, but we're not drastically adjusting percentages at this time. That's not the plan. So you can definitely run your numbers and give it a test. Maybe you've got somebody in your agency, or maybe you yourself are handy with Excel, or you just want to get out the good old fashioned calculator and do your percentages. Anything like that can help you feel more prepared, give you a better sense of what you're getting into, so that when we send you out your score and when we say, hey, your score's available, you're not like, wait a second, I thought I was going to score 100 points and I just scored 50. Nobody likes being surprised. It's just a helpful thing for us to do when we're preparing. And then we're going to talk more about other things, about other ways to prepare in just a moment, because I've got some other information coming up soon. But the last thing I just want to hit on, and I'm happy to go into more detail about this if we need to, is on the bonus questions. Please be thoughtful in your narrative. Talk about all the applicable activities related to a question. If you're not a grant writer, if that's not your bread and butter, if somebody else in your agency writes grants, maybe get these questions over to them and have them write them for you, because these are some subjective questions. We have a lot of objective criteria in our evaluation of projects. We've got all those performance questions, lots of yes, no questions, lots of that stuff. But the bonus questions are narrative driven and they're subjective. We do our best to have the same people try and evaluate some things, but we also want to cross compare a little bit when we have scores on bonus point questions. So it's possible that one person looks at an answer and says, that's a 2-point answer, and somebody else says, that's 5 points. We try not to do that, but it happens. And if you find that and you want to appeal it, certainly come back to us and talk to about your score. I'm happy to do that. But what I saw a lot last year, and this is just a training issue, I think we weren't asking these questions before, was people just kind of saying, oh, I'm just going to put in the truth. We have a non-discrimination policy, and that's the answer. That is great. You should have a non-discrimination policy as an agency receiving federal funding. But if you were to have more narrative and maybe not a typo about your organization's hiring practices, how you recruit board members, diversity, and non-discrimination, using more narrative. And this is not like a perfect answer by any means. This would not get, all the points in the world, but like it was striking to sometimes see somebody who is a high performing agency in many other ways have like a one word answer, and an agency who maybe struggles in lots of criteria, but they wrote a whole paragraph. And if you're kind of fighting for points there, if you've got some, challenges, maybe that additional narrative, that additional context that you're providing, as long as it's answering the question, I want to preface that. If it's answering the question, then it can help. So I don't want to discourage people at all. This is not, nobody's, thinking you're going to get an English degree out of taking the application response, a certain way. But I do want to just encourage you to think thoughtfully about what you put in those narrative boxes, maybe work with somebody else. If you really think you're going to need some bonus points, especially, just be thoughtful about what you put in there, and be comprehensive. Talk about everything. Celebrate the work that you're doing. Because when we've got somebody who lists out every single policy they have related to DEI, and another agency that just says we have a non-discrimination policy, it's very hard to evaluate those and say, oh yeah, those are the same score. So just in case this is your situation, what to do if you aren't doing a thing, especially if it's a DEI issue, because we know that every organization is in a different situation. Some organizations have made that the front and center of their programming, their operations, and a lot of the work in the last 4 years. Other organizations have had tremendous challenges come from other directions and have had to deprioritize that in some way. We understand, and we're not trying to punish anybody for the necessary choices that you have to make when you're operating an agency. But remember that HUD's priorities haven't changed. So as long as HUD is saying to continuums of care, you should be evaluating and supporting organizations that are doing DEI work, that are supporting inclusion, that are supporting representation of people with lived experience, then we're going to keep asking these questions. It's a part of what, again, we need to reflect what HUD is prioritizing so that we can do the things we need to do to help get the money we want to serve the people we want to serve. And it's good things. It's good work. But if you're not sure, discuss how this might impact your funding, especially if you're applying for a new project. If you're thinking about applying for new money and you're not doing anything in this space, there are more questions in the new project application about the DEI work than there are, and they're not bonus points, they're points. So discuss whether or not it's a priority. And if it isn't, just recognize like, okay, well then we may not score as well as we'd like to. And that's just kind of the way things are. And that's a part of this process. If it is something you've been wanting to prioritize, talk to peers, talk to other partners in your community, talk to other people who do COC work in the balance of state. And we can certainly provide some of that peer support through future calls like this. We didn't have enough time to get to a lot of it today, but we could definitely do that. And then, if you're not sure at all, if your organization feels stuck, reach out to us. We could recommend some HUD trainings that are available. We could connect you with other types of technical assistance. We could suggest lots of different kinds of resources to help you assist in this area. And it's not just DEI, but I think particularly because that's where we saw the largest amount of disparity between different types of answers and different types of work that was happening, kind of bringing that up as kind of a main example. But it may be other things that you're not scoring as well on. And similar things would be true here. Discuss how much of a priority something is within the organization. Talk to others, talk to us, talk to the folks who can assist you like us to figure out what your next steps might be. So a couple things to know about deductions. You can have points reduced on your application for a couple of reasons. First is submitting late. Now we often, the last couple of years, have had something happen and we've had to extend the deadline. If you submit at the extended deadline, obviously you're not submitting late, but if you submit after the deadline that was set for you, you will have points deducted from your application. If you are fine on that, there are some other things that can happen that will cause an application reviewer to decide to reduce points on your application by using deductions. The most common thing we saw last year were repeated requests to make corrections to renewal applications, and those requests being either ignored or done improperly. So for example, you submit your renewal application. In the performance section, you list off that your data quality was 10 out of 10 points. You got all those points there. Yes, yes, yes. And you've put in those numbers, and we go to look at your APR and we see wildly different percentages than those data quality numbers that you put in. We'd push it back to you and say, we don't see these numbers. Can you take a look at this and make those corrections? And when it gets pushed back to us, it's got a different set of numbers that are still wrong. That happens. And it can get to a certain point where our reviewer would decide, I've provided support, I've provided assistance, and it's time now for us to take some action where there need to be consequences. I'm telling you this just because it did happen last year. It's not to say we want to do that. We try and avoid doing that, but it can happen. The performance section is the most common area it happens in. Usually, if it's just a simple mistake, people correct it, that's not going to be a problem. It's the repeated errors where essentially either we're having a serious misunderstanding of how an APR works, which is concerning, or there's some other issue going on where data is maybe coming from another location than what we're receiving on the APR. So I'm just letting folks know it does happen, not very often. And you can, of course, appeal that. If we put a deduction on your application and you want to appeal it, you're welcome to do that. And we would follow the traditional appeals process to address it. So timeline, I saw somebody ask a question about when is this going to happen? When do we know what is going to happen next? So our planned timeline, and I'm going to hop on to the one question that came up. I would anticipate us having a IRPA out in the next 45 days. So I would anticipate mid-May, early May. We're on track for that. I have a meeting with our tech team tomorrow to make sure we're on track to have the IRPA ready. So more on that soon. If I find out there's more problems, then we may need to push that back. But our plan would be in the next 45 days to have a renewal application available for you to complete. I would expect you to have about 3 weeks to complete that application, and then we'll provide you that score in mid to late June. I would anticipate us having an additional webinar once we have that application tool available to walk you through how to use it, answer any questions about the tool itself, and making sure people feel familiar and comfortable with the software we're using to do it. Other things that are happening are, of course, the grant inventory worksheet. So we always get a grant inventory worksheet, the GIW, which is that list of projects that we give HUD to tell HUD what they've given us. Like, it's my favorite thing. And I would expect to see that anytime now in the next 60 days. Everything is indicating we're probably on a normal time frame, normal being however it's been for the last 5 years. And I would anticipate us getting a grant inventory worksheet in the next 60 days. So you'll see something come from my team if you are a direct HUD funded project, asking you to verify some information. If you are a subrecipient of IHCDA, we may ask you some questions, or we may be silent because we've got all your grant information. So we should know if the grant information is correct or not, unless we've done a budget modification recently that hasn't come through for some reason and we've got some questions. But 9 times out of 10, we're pretty good on our subrecipients of IHCDA. So we talked about that renewal application, again, looking for that by early to mid-May, giving yourself about 3 weeks to complete, which is another reason why if you run those numbers now and you need to make fixes, you can, because 3 weeks will not be a lot of time, especially if everybody is trying to run APRs and make corrections and run help desk tickets and all that. We want to be mindful of that. So keep in mind that 3 weeks will likely be the amount of time you have to complete. And then you will get your score, like I said, in mid to late June. After we've had a chance to review everything. We like to give everybody their score at the same time, which is why we wait so long. So it's not so much that we haven't scored an application, it's that we like to tell everybody all at once, so that, you know, people are getting a notification at the same time and nobody feels left out or not having enough time to, or not as much time as somebody else did to do X, Y, or Z. I would anticipate a NOFO drop around July 1. Once we get that NOFO, that Notice of Funding Opportunity from HUD for COC, that is what kicks off the rest of our process. We can't really do anything with your renewal application other than score it until we have the notice. We haven't seen anything major come through from HUD that we would expect we'd have to backpedal on anything. So I would expect, once we have that notice, eSnaps anymore takes like 2, sometimes 3 weeks to open. For those of you who are direct HUD funded, we always do a webinar with those direct HUD funded projects. And we can't do it until eSnaps opens. We don't like to do it until eSnaps opens because oftentimes y'all are literally sitting at your computers, like doing the thing with us as we're teaching you how to do it, I should say Howard is teaching you how to do it. So look for that to come in July. And if you are a direct HUD funded project, keep checking eSnaps to see if your project is there, because it may be open for you to create that new project and start that process. Some of y'all are old hat at this, so it's no big deal for you to do that even with or without the training. I would anticipate then us to have a new project application in mid-July would be my hope, possibly getting into the 3rd week of July, depending on timing of when that NOFO drops. We usually can drop it pretty quickly as long as HUD doesn't do anything crazy. And then remember, if you are applying for a new project, including an expansion, you'll have about 2 weeks. So that timeline's pretty short, and that's usually just because HUD gives us a lot of deadlines we have to hit. And in order for us to hit those deadlines, we have to move pretty quickly without a lot of disruption to the timeline itself, because that timeline is set in stone. It's written into the notice. And if we can't meet that timeline, then we will lose points on our application, which we want to lose points on. New project applicants will have an opportunity to attend a webinar. And then the full ranking will be announced on late August. That would be my anticipation given this timeline. So if we were to have a ranking or a NOFO drop in early July, we would definitely announce a ranking, no later than the end of August, because again, we have to hit the timelines. And typically if they drop it in July, they're making it due by mid to late September. So this is kind of the timeline to expect. I can't believe it's April, but this clock is really actually starting to tick now. So start kind of planning for those activities now and thinking about that in your calendar. So the last thing I wanted to share about is an additional webinar opportunity. I will be sending out an invitation to a couple of key partners who had some lower scores on their IRPA last year. And this will be an opportunity for us to dig deeper into your data from this year so that you feel more prepared with your APR and all of that. We'll make it available to anybody. So if you'd like to come, shoot me an email, shoot your analyst an email, and we'll forward that information to you. It's completely optional if you're not personally invited. If you are personally invited, we'd really, really like you to attend. We're offering this opportunity this year as part of a recommendation from our Performance and Outcomes Committee. I worked with a subcommittee of them on how to improve performance on the renewal application, and this was a suggested practice that we take on. So kudos to some of your partners here, Julie from NWI, Crystal from Sojourner Truth House, and I'm blanking on whoever else was in that group with me, but thank you all for your feedback on this process, and hopefully we are able to have this training be helpful to those of you who maybe struggled with the IRPA last year. If you are planning to attend that, I would definitely pull your APR so that you can bring it with you and have that interactive discussion about the tool, the evaluation criteria, and the scoring and things like that. So we hope to see you then if you're able to join us. And again, completely optional opportunity if you are interested. So apologies for my technology difficulties, but I did manage to squeeze this all through in an hour. I'm going to check and see if we have any other questions. I don't immediately see anything. Yes, hi Myra. Yeah, so we are still anticipating, early to mid-May. I'll definitely let you guys know as soon as I hear from our tech team tomorrow if that is at all off base. And I'm hoping to have good news on that front so that we don't have to move the date any later. I don't see any other part. Thank you, Daniela, for all your comments here. Any questions? Again, I know we're on time, so I appreciate you all being here today. Okay, I'm not seeing any unless I've frozen and I'm just talking to the ether. So what I will just share is that we'll be getting out those notices to folks who we'd like to have come to that April 18th session by Friday. I'll be sending out those invitations, and if you have any questions or would like to attend, please let me know. We're happy to, include you in that session. I will be working with my colleagues to get up all of the training sessions and get out these materials. I know you've been waiting on them for those of you who couldn't attend everything, but technology is fun sometimes. So getting those things on YouTube and all those other places. So I just am so glad folks were able to attend today. And if you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. Otherwise, we'll be in touch. Thank you so much. I'll stay on for a couple minutes if anybody needs anything, but just thank you for your time today.